Hilchus Trumas Perek Achadoser. Hatruma nitenes lachilo uleshtio lesicha. Truma is the Kaddish. Memela, you can't just use it as you want. There's hagbolas of how you use it. So atera nitenes atruma nitenes lachilo uleshtio lesicha. Why sicha? Shas sicha hi kishtia. Sicha is a din like shtia shnamar. Batove kamayim bekirbe kashem batzmeisov. So we see that shemen batzmeisov is like mayim bekirbe. That's one thing. And vashtia is b'chalal achila. So mele, that's why you're allowed to eat it, you're allowed to drink it, and you're allowed to use it for sicha. Lechel, davar shadarki lechel. To eat something has to be davar shadarki lechel, which means also that l'mashal, if something is normally eaten cooked, and you want to eat it raw, that's not the heter to eat truma. You have to eat truma in the normal manner of eating it. Now there is a fakert if it's normally eaten cooked and raw, and you want to cook it, so it's also not. Lechel, davar shadarki lechel. And also velishte is davar shadarki lishtes, which means, for example, shemen. Since it's not the derech to drink shemen, so mainly you don't have the rishus to drink shemen of truma. You're only allowed to drink shemen of truma. You're only allowed to drink truma in a manner which is the normal way of drinking. And also the losuch darkish davar shadarki losuch. Le yosuch yayin v'chemetz. You're not allowed to yosuch yayin v'chemetz because it's not the derech to use yayin v'chemetz for sicha. Avol sochu is Hashem and ator. With shem and tor, you're allowed to be soch. However, umadlik is atomi. You shouldn't be soch with shem and tomi, because if you have shem and tomi, so shem and tomi is for hadloka. Now, why aren't you allowed to be madlik shem? If bishlem is shem, which you're going to use for food, so you say you shouldn't use it for sicha. The Amos says you could use it for sicha. Shem and tor, even though it could be used for food, it could be used for sicha. Shem and tomi could be used for fuel. So why can't it be used for sicha as well? So it's brought down two reasons. Tesus says that the reason is because there's a chi of sreifa. Just like by kachim there's a chi of sreifa, so we learn out truma from kachim that there's a mitzvah of sreifa, so it shouldn't be sicha. It's also brought down that since sicha is like shtia, so just like you're not allowed to drink shem and tomei, so who adin, you're not allowed to be soch shem and tomei. So it's bekitzer. Truma could only be used for food, or for drink, or for sicha. And it has to be kederach. You eat something which is darke lechel, you drink something which is darke lishtes, and you soch something which is darke besicha. Shem and tomi, you shouldn't be soch. Shem and tomi is for burning. You burn it. That's called shem and sefer b'chol mokim. Halacha beis. Now we're going to learn that foods of truma can't be changed from its original state. So in other words, you can't take food and make it into drink. Now that is you can't change it in a way that you're ruining it. However, to take dates and to press them together and to make it into a cake, that's fine. However, to go ahead and take dates and make it into beer, so you're making it into a drink and you're throwing out also the leftover of these tmorim, because that's when they become beer. So knows the sediment is the tmorim itself is thrown out, so that you're not allowed to. To take tmorim and to turn it into honey, that's also no good. To make apples into cider. Peiros astov are grapes that are grown in the fall, so they would be regular to make vinegar out of it, so that's also not permitted. You're not allowed to change it from its original state. Chutz, we learn out, it says, so we learn out that you can make it into oil and you can make it into wine. So when you have peiros of truma, you could press them together, but you can't go ahead and change its state of being, of making it into an oichel, into a mashke. Only benigea yayin and shemen, over there you're allowed to take the grapes and the olives and press it into and make yayin and shemen out of it. Now avar v'asur heichel mashke, so the din zareza shiseu, the kohen should drink it. The zar she'achol dvash tmorim or v'yein tapuchim u'kiyetz v'embishgoga is eini chayiv l'shalom. Normally the din is a zar she'achol truma, the chayiv l'shalom keren v'chemesh. Over here he's not mechayiv keren v'chemesh. The Rabbi points out that avada, if it belongs to a kohen, he's mechayiv al tamazik. knows he doesn't have a special din of an Eichel Truma Bishgaga, but on the other hand, he's Chayv Mazik. But the point over here is that he doesn't have a din of an Eichel Truma Bishgaga. Now, since this Truma was changed from a matzav of being an Eichel to becoming a Mashke, so in Mele, that Mashke doesn't have a din of the Truma. That's V'zor She'ochel Dvash Tmorim, or V'yein Tapuchim U'kiyetze Ben Bishgaga, Ein Chayv L'Shalom. However, V'mochel B'mezid, and he's not allowed to because it's a Zor, is Makanesa Marcus Mardis. A Zor that eats Truma is Chayv Malkus. But over here, since it doesn't have a din of Truma because it was changed, so therefore, Makanesa Marcus Mardis. Halacha Gimel, Ein Noisnen Dvela Ugregres L'Techa Murias. You're not allowed to put dried figs or dates into the Murias. That's brine, which is something which is the juice of fish. Mipnei Shuma Abdam, because you're ruining, you're enhancing the taste of the brine, but on the other end, you're ruining the Dvela and the Gregres, and that's not allowed. Avol Noisnen Sayayin L'Techa Murias. You're allowed to take wine and mix it with Murias, because the wine is still retaining its state as being a mashka. In other words, over there you're taking oichel and you're giving it taste into the brine, and you're ruining the oichel. Mashenkin over here you have the wine and you're mixing it with the murias, and mainly you still have that original wine plus the murias, and that's beseder. Then the ein mefatmanas Hashem. Fatmanas Hashem is to take oil and to make it to mix it with some certain types of spices. Mipnei shumitziye miklal macholis. Because even though you're allowed to take oil, which could be used for food, and use it to smear on yourself, that's only because the oil is still edible, and memeli you're allowed to use it to smear on yourself. Because smearing on yourself, sicha is bechlal shtia. But to take oil and to make it not edible anymore, that you're not allowed to. So in other words, when you go ahead and you're mafatim Hashem, which you mix it with certain spices, in other words, certain types of psamim, so it no longer becomes edible. So Mela goes out of the shem of shemen, which is edible, and that you're not allowed to. Avu ma'arvin, yayin, udvash, upilpul, and kiyetzebei, to mix all different types of foods, which are all truma, or not all truma, you're allowed to, because over here the pshat is it's all food, and you're enhancing. One food is enhancing the other food. The nekudas advarim is you're not allowed to take food and change it into something which is mashka. You're not allowed to take food and cause that this food should give a tam into other food, but on the other hand, this food is going to get ruined. In other words, you're not really going to use the whole food. You're only giving a tam, like you're putting these figs or these dates into the brine. So memela, it's adding taste to the brine, but on the other end, you're losing the fig and the dates. And there's another din that you're not allowed to take shemen, which is edible, and make it edible. Even though shemen you're allowed to use for sicha, but you're not allowed to take shemen and make it that it should become mefatmanas Hashem. Halacha dalet. Ein mevashlin yayin shel truma. To cook yayin shel truma, you're not allowed to. Mipnei shumimate, because through the cooking process, part of it evaporates. Ein koivshin solim shel truma, b'choimet shel truma. Mipnei shemafsid ha'choimet. So notice it's good for the psolim, but on the other end, the choimetz is being ruined. So you're taking choimetz of truma, and you're using it for something, but lapel, it's helping the psalm shel truma, but on the other end, the chaimus of truma is going to get ruined. Ein ma'arvin tvua bekitnius. You're not allowed to mix tvua bekitnius, because vices, when the kidneys get mixed with the tvua, it ruins the tvua, so it's not good for the tvua. So therefore, you shouldn't mix tvua with kidneys. V'chol dover sheyisparish zem izek shekeven nesei. In other words, even though you're mixing it, but still, if you go through a sieve, so mainly you'll be able to separate one from the other. So ma'arvin, you're allowed to mix it. In other words, since it's not really mixed, in other words, when aren't you allowed to mix something when it's mixed to the extent where you're not going to really be able to separate it? Masha'inkin, if it's in an eifin, that you'll still be able to separate it by putting it through a sieve, so memela, that's mutter. Mishacharvi Yerushalayim, and there was like a armkat, it was people were poor and they didn't have really any food. So memela is chila la'aref tvua b'tvua. Ukitnis bekitnis. In other words, tvua b'tvua would mean, let's say, chitos eirim. So even though chitos eirim is also not good for the chitim to be mixed with the eirim, and sometimes better quality kidneys is not good to be mixed with lesser quality kidneys, but then because of the poverty that they experienced, Mishachar v'Yehuda, so they would do that. There was a heter to do that. Avolei tvua bekitnis, because kidneys bekitnis, even though it's ruining it a little bit, but it's only a little bit. And al-der is that tvua b'tvua is also only ruining it a little bit. Mashenken tvua bekitnis is a bigger hefsid, and therefore that hefsid wasn't chuter even mishachar v'Yerushalayim. Halacha hey, kedera shemeragdim es hakemet b'chulin, just like we go through the sifting process of flour by chulin, it's kach neg hakeim b'truma, so the kohen could also sift through his flour by truma. It says meraked lechel, he sifts umash lichas amorson, and he throws away the bran. So even though be'etzem he could have really used all the bran while it was mixed with the flour, it would be whole wheat, completely whole wheat flour. But on the other hand, since the normal seder is to sift through the flour and get rid of some of the bran, so in Mela al derez over here he could do with truma. He wanted to sift it through very well. So he'll end up getting from a whole saw. So a normal saw has 6 kavim. So he's going to end up getting a sixth of the flour, or a third of the flour, 2/6 of the flour. Maybe he's going to be throwing away most of the flour. So then his leyash l'chesashar. He shouldn't just discard and throw away the rest. He should put it away in a makim mutzna, which should be used later. And right now he'll use just the very, very fine flour, the very white flour that he got out, the kaveh kabayim, from this saw. So b'kitzur, so normally a person could go through the sifting process of kemach in the normal way, even though it's part of it is truma, so you can still get rid of the bran. Masha'inkein, if he wants to sift it through very fine, in other words, he wants to take out very white flour, so then the rest of the flour he shouldn't just throw away. Halacha vav, shemesh shel truma, ein choisen beitana v'kirayim. You're allowed to use the oil of truma to smear yourself, but you can't smear the tana v'kirayim. In other words, you smear it on top of the oven, different types of ovens, which helps the oven, it gives the oven strength. That you're not allowed to do, because shemen you're allowed to use for sicha. Sicha has a din of shtia, but to use it on kelim, that you're not allowed to. And also, you're not allowed to use this oil to smear a shoe, which also helps the shoe, helps the leather by having oil on it. But that's not why you're allowed to use it with this oil. This oil has to be used either for eating or for smearing yourself. You shouldn't even be smearing your foot while your foot is still wearing the shoe, because inevitably you will be smearing the shoe. You're allowed to go ahead and smear your foot, and then you put on the manul sandal. You could smear yourself, your body, and then then you have like a new mat made out of leather, and you really want to get some oil on that mat, but you're not allowed to take the oil of shemen to put it on the mat. So you could do is smear yourself with shemen, and then roll on that mat. So memela, obviously, from your body, the shemen which was already on your body will go onto the mat. But since it was already on your body, so and that was mutter, and that became already neschal because it was used for sicha. So now the fact that from your body it's going to go onto the mat is not a problem. Even though the katavli is getting oil. You certainly shouldn't put shemen onto a mat of leather and then start rolling on it, because for sure some of the oil is going to be absorbed by the leather, and that you're not allowed to. The chiddush over here is even tavla shel shayish, even we're dealing with something with a slab of marble, so obviously the marble is not going to be absorbing any of the shemen, and now you're going to be rolling on this slab of marble, so l'chura, your body is going to be smeared with this oil. But nevertheless, since we're dealing with the oil was on the slab of shemen, so you're not going to get all the oil off the slab. Some of it is going to remain on the slab, so you're not allowed to do that. So nachamal, to take the oil and smear yourself, and then roll on something, and ultimately from yourself it will go onto that thing, that's fine. Because once it was on you, so it was already neschal from Dushas Truma, in other words, it was already used. Mele is not a problem of it being transferred to something else. You put it on something else, and some of it is going to get lost, or some of it is going to be used for this mat of leather. That's awesome. Halacha Zayin. Kol le'echol truma, afilu peiris. There's not only if a person eats bread, but even peiris, is sarech netilas yadayim. You have to wash your hands before you eat truma. Afal pi shehoyu yodav teheres, kamei sheyizbar b'mekayim. And also, ve'ein necheles im hazor al hashulchan, because Gzeir Shem Yechel, we're afraid that the Zor may eat from it. So you shouldn't be eating at the same table, the Zor eating whatever he's eating, and you're eating Truma, because there's a concern the Zor may take from your Truma. But Trumas, how that's regular Truma. However, Trumas Chutz Loretz is Necheles Amazor al Shulchan, and also Ve'enat Sichen Til Sidayim. The Chiyuv of Til Sidayim only applies to Trumas Eretz Yisrael and not to Trumas Chutz Loretz. And al derech zeh, the Isser of Lechel Mazor al Shulchan doesn't apply to Trumas Chutz Loretz. Ve'enat Sichen Til Sidayim Kichul has the same din of Chul. Ve'en Sochen Truma B'Yadayim Sovis. So we're talking about eating. You're not allowed to eat Truma unless you haven't Til Sidayim. You're saying when being Soch the Truma, so you're not allowed to be Soch the Truma B'Yadayim Sovis, which means with Yadayim, which there was no Til Sidayim. We're talking about, again, Trumas Eretz Yisrael, Trumas Chutz Loretz. There was no Isser of having the Til Sidayim. Now, Nofel al Psari, if the Truma, the Shemer of Truma already fell on your flesh, is Mishav Shefei B'Yadayim Suavis. Then you're allowed to smear it in B'Yadayim Suavis, because once it fell on Psari, it was already Nischalel from the Kedushas Truma, because it was like smeared already, and therefore the fact that you're touching it with B'Yadayim Suavis is not a problem. Aval, it's not so clear, this Aval over here. Sochen is a cotton, b'shem and truma b'teich shiva. Because an oral is not allowed to use truma. We learned before, an oral is not allowed to eat truma. Now, oral is also not allowed to smear himself with truma. Now, the chiddush is that if you have a cotton, which is still within the first 7 days, so he's not yet chayiv b'mila, he's still before the chiyuv mila, so Memele, he doesn't have a din of an oral. Memele, an oral is not allowed to eat truma, and also not allowed to smear himself with truma. But this cotton, since he's still before the chiyuv milah, so he doesn't have a din of an oral, so you could smear him with oil. Aval sochen is a cotton b'shem and truma b'teich shiva, shahanelad kol shiva in choshev oral. A noilad, someone that was just born, so the first 7 days he's not considered an oral. And Chinuch says that the night going into the 8th day, he is considered an oral. So already by Yom HaShmini, there's a chiyuv milah. It's just that lepeil, at night you can't be mal, but lepeil, he has a pseudin of an oral. That's a chidush that the Minchas Chinuch says. The Lashon Rambam is b'teich shiva, the first 7 days. It doesn't say until the Yom HaShmini. Halacha ches. Sochu akein atzmei b'shemesh shel truma. A person could smear himself with shemesh shel truma. Just as we learned before, that a person smears himself with shemesh shel truma, and then he could go and roll on a mat of leather. So in the same thing over here, a person could smear himself with shemesh shel truma, and then maybe ben bite Yisrael, he brings his enakul, which is a Yisrael because he's ben bite, umagili al gabav, and he rolls him on top of him. So lepel, to take this child, which is a zor, and to smear him with shemesh shel truma would be aser. But once he was already smeared with shemesh shel truma, so what's left of that shemen on his body was already nischal. So mainly the fact that this ben bite is also being smeared from it is not a problem. A person smeared himself with shemen and then he goes into a merchet, is mutal azor lemeshche. Lemeshche, some people is geiris, not lemeshche but lemashmeshe. I'll call upon him, azor is allowed to go and give him a massage, and it's to massage the oil into his body, b'merchet. Even though by the Zor putting this oil into him, so he's also getting like oil on himself. But nevertheless, since this oil was already on the person's body, so again, as we said before, once it was on the person's body, it was already in his chal. So Mela, there's no problem of someone else having hana from it. Halacha test kehenes shechafefa reisha betilson shel truma. Tilson shel truma is certain growth or something that grows, but it's something which b'shas atchak could be eaten by a person, but it's not normally eaten. So therefore, it's normally used as a soap, as a shampoo. So she, a woman, a kehenes, which washed her head with tilson shel truma, is eina yisraelis muteris lochafach. If there's any tilson left, so the Yisrael is not allowed to use it because the kehenes is allowed to use it. And it's a kiddush. Because something that's not royal achila bechlal is not truma. So obviously this tilson must be royal achila. On the other end, we're not really dealing with smearing. It's not oil. So why should she be allowed to be chefefes reisha b'manavshah? If it's truma, it means it's royal achila. So why should it be chefefes reisha? The answer is because it's royal achila only b'shas atchak, like the Rambam soon say. This royal achila, it's not really royal. Ram says it's any royal meichalodim, and Farshim explained it's not a royal meichalodim on a regular basis. If it wouldn't be royal meichalodim at all, it wouldn't be truma. But since it's not royal meichalodim on a regular basis, so therefore she's allowed to use it to wash herself, to wash her hair with it. But on the other end, she's a kehanis, so she's allowed to. Masha'enk in the Yisraelis, even if there's leftover tilson, so then she's not allowed to. But however, the tilson that already went into the hair of the kehanis, and now this Yisraelis wants to take her hair and connect it to the hair of the kehanis, and Mamela have benefit from the tilson, which is already used in the hair of the kehanis. That's permissible. That's what we're learning here. Halacha test. Kehanis shechafifa reisha betilson shel truma. Is Eina Yisraelis muteres lachav achra. With the leftover tilson, she's not allowed to. Abel mageles se'ara b'sara. But she's allowed to take her hair and mix her hair with the other one's hair. So obviously there's still of that tilson left in the hair, which has this cleansing potential. And Memela, she puts her hair and she mixes it with that hair. Memela, she's being nana. Why should they be allowed to use this sar betilson even for a keim? This tilson shel truma. Because tilson is not really royal meichalodim. So as we said, it doesn't mean it's not at all royal meichalodim. Because if it wouldn't be at all royal meichalodim, you wouldn't be able to use it. I mean, it wouldn't be b'chlal truma. It's not royal meichalodim on a regular basis. So therefore, this was mutter. But again, it's only mutter for a kehanis, and the Yisraelis could only use it the thing that the kehanis already used. Halacha yud. Uktzei te'enim. Uktzei te'enim is the stem of the te'enim of the figs, which through that stem it was attached to the tree. And we're talking about the uketz, which is actually in the te'enim, not the one that's sticking out. There's an uketz in the te'enim that's covered in the te'enim, but it's an uketz, it's only a stem. And also ugregris, the uktzim of gregris, which is dried figs, v'haklisim, and also different types of figs, v'charuvim, which is boxer, umi'i avatiach, the inside of the avatiach, which is certain seeds of the avatiach, uklipi avatiach, the peels of avatiach, v'esrig, and the peels of an esrig, or malafafein, or the cucumber, is afal pi she'ein b'meichel. All of these things we're talking about, there's no food there, it's only peels. And also knivas yerek, shemashlichem balibatim, when you have a vegetable, so you cut off a little piece of the vegetable that's not so edible, but on the other end, b'di'evet, it could be edible, but things that a balabas normally would cut off, the edges. So all of these things, harei elu asurim l'zor. So even though they're not mamish food, again, we're talking about uktzei te'enim and gregus and klisim and charuvim. We're talking about things that are only the stems. They're the stems, they're not mamish food. And al derech we're talking about the inner, the seeds of the avatiach, or we're talking about the peels, different peels, or we're talking about the vegetables which are normally cut off and thrown away. But nevertheless, since all of these things are edible, so therefore, harelu asurim l'zorim. Aval knivas yerek shemekanvin haganonim, the parts of the vegetables which the gardeners usually cut off, which is already less royal achila, so that's mutaris l'zar. Now, klipe pulim the shumshmin, the shells of beans and sesames, is in yesh b'em eichel, if there's still food in there, is asurin, because agav the food, this is also called food. However, ein b'em eichel, there's only peels left, so then is asurin. So it's different than the peels we said before. Before we said the peels have it in a veichel, and these peels only have it in a veichel if there's still food left in them. Now, garini esrig mutar, the seeds of an esrig is always mutar because it doesn't have a din of eichel, it doesn't have a din of truma. Now, garini zeisim utmorim v'charuvim, the seeds of zeisim, tmorim, and charuvim is afal pi shalei konsun akein, is arei elu asurim lezorim. That's the girsa we have. Another girsa is punkt fakert. That garini zeisim utmorim v'charuvim afal pi shekonsun akein, punkt fakert. Afal pi shekonsun akein is arei elu mutorim lezorim, because they're not considered oichel. The question is, are they considered oichel or not? So the other girsa is saying no, that the Radvaz brings that the beferish not, that they're not considered eichel, and therefore afal pi shekonsun akein is arela mutarim luzarim, because they're not eichel. However, sh'ar garinim, other garinim. So bisman shekonsum v'yeshvim lachluchas limtzi seisam, when you gather them together, and there's an interest in using it as food, and there's still a certain moisture which you could still suck out, is asur and lazar. They meshlichon, but if you discarded them, you threw them away, so then it's mutaris. It's nachamal. The way we're saying the gears of the radvaz. The esreg is mutter because it's absolutely not food. Al derelzeh garini zeisim tmorim v'charuvim, which is l'chur according to the radvaz the same like esreg, is afal pi shekonsum akein, and is nevertheless the mutter lazar. Why? Because again they're absolutely not food. Masha'ink and other garinim, it depends if konsum or not konsum. Halacha Yud Beis. Hasubin shel chitim chadoshes. Now, when you have chitim, you have wheat. So if you have older wheat, so the bran that you sift out of the wheat doesn't really have flour. You separate the bran from the flour. Mashenkin, when you have fresher wheat, so even the bran that you sift out has a lot of flour in it. So mele, it's more edible. So that's it. Hasubin shel chitim chadoshes. The bran that comes out of wheat, which is more fresh wheat, is asurin. Why? Because in this subin, there's mixed in a lot of flour. It doesn't come out subin as subin, pure subin. However, the shel yishanis, if we're dealing with bran that comes from older wheat, so that bran is more of pure bran, doesn't have flour in it. So therefore, mutter, it's mutter because it's not considered food. But mosai nikru chadoshes. When is it called chadoshes? If we're dealing, you harvested the wheat, and still it's a matzah where people are still being lachbid ben agronis. You can't thresh them because since they're too soft to be threshed, the animals will ruin it. So the only way to get the kernels out of the stalks is by banging them. So as long as they're still being banged ben agronis, at that point in time, they can't be threshed. And they're only being banged, bein agronis, so that's how they're being taken out. So at that point in time, they're still called chitim. Mashenkin, when that time passes by, they're still called chadoshes rather. They're still called fresh. Mashenkin, when that time passes, so then they go into the category of yishans. Halacha Yud Gimel. Hanitzoilus means when it starts getting ruined, like we had been a mess, it was called netzel. So al derez that's when a person that's a dead body starts being decomposed. So al derez and nitzoilus means the food starts being decomposed. V'harakboni yeshel truma, and it starts rotting. Is nevertheless it's asuris. They're still asur. Even though they're not already food as they were, but nevertheless they still have a din of truma. They still have a din of oichel. However, helu ovak, it became to the point where it started becoming a powdery substance. In other words, it became so rotted that it started becoming a powdery substance. On top of it, so then it loses its shem food, it loses its shem truma and its mutaris. Shmorim shel truma. If you have sediment of wine, you have the dregs of wine, the sediment of the truma, shenosan aleim mayim, which you poured water over it, which means you're pouring water and you're taking some of the juice of the sediment into the water, is a rishon v'asheni the first time, and the second time is asur lazar. So it's asur lazar because the wine which is in the sediment is going into the water. However, the shlishi, the third pouring of water, that's already mutter. That's talking about if you're pouring water and you're getting the juice of the sediment into the water. However, you're not pouring water onto the sediment. You're letting the little bit of wine that's in the sediment drip out of the sediment. You hung it on some type of a sift, and the male it's coming through. A sieve is el misan namayim al ashmarim bavad is a fashlishi asur lazar. There really is, even no matter how much, there's the wine that's coming out of the sediment has a din of wine. Halacha Yudalad Negura shapina mimenu chiti truma. The din is that ein mevatel and isol lechatchila, and you're not allowed to go lechatchila to go ahead and mix truma with chulin in order to make the truma bottle, even bottle b'meya. Now you have over here a megura. A megura is like a grain heap, a place where you're storing wheat, you're storing kernels of wheat, and shapina mimenu chiti truma. You took the kernels of truma out of that megura. Now the question is, there may be a few kernels left. Now if you're going to start putting chitim shel chulin inside, so those few kernels that are going to be left will become bottle in the chulin. So the din is ein mechayv nesiliyas yeshiv malaket achas v'achar kach yitin l'teicha chulin. You're not mechuyev to go ahead and make sure each kernel that's there of truma should come out, Elamachabit kedarka, you just sweep it out, you clean it out as you would normally do, and then v'nes l'techa chulin. And the fact that there may be a few kernels of wheat that are truma is not important, because that's not considered being mevatel isel chatchila. V'chein chavish shel shemen truma shenishpacha. You had a barrel of shemen of truma that was poured out. Now the question is, there's still some residue of the truma in the barrel. There's still some residue of the truma in the barrel. Is a mechayv nesi lias yeshu mitapeach, to make sure that all the truma should get out. The same way you neig b'chulin, just like you pour it out, and you pour it out completely, and then you fill it up with whatever else you're going to fill it up. So that is over here. If you had the chavis was filled of wine of truma, and now you poured it out, so you pour it out completely, and then you pour in whatever you have to pour in. Halacha tezvav. Hama'ara kad shel shemen truma. A person that's pouring out a jug of oil of truma. Is areza ma'ara, you pour it out, ad sheyifsek ha'amud, until it stops flowing, and then the aschal Hashem and lintef ma'at me'at, and that's when the oil starts dripping a little bit. The kiv and shenot for gimel titin zu. Once there's 3 drops that come out of it, so even though if you'll hold it longer, some more drops will come out, but nevertheless, once it already the flow stopped, and now the drops are coming out, and 3 drops came out, is daya, that's enough. And mutter litin bekad shemen chulin, you're allowed to put it now into this jar, shemen chulin. Now harei shleinos and lepeil, if you didn't put, knows you emptied the jar, and the jar seemed empty, and at that point in time you were allowed to put chulin in. But then you left it standing, so the sediment, what was left of the truma, which were on the sides of the kad, fell down, and now you have like a little bit of truma on the bottom. And now you have in the kad a little bit left, a little bit of mamoshes of oil on the bottom, which rolled down from the sides of the shemen. So had you have done right away, you could have filled it up. But since you left it there and it rolled down, it's eisa tamtzis truma, and you have to put those. You just pour that tamtzis out. You can't go ahead and pour chulin into it, because there's already this gathering of truma dika oil, and only then could you put in chulin. Halacha tezayin. Now the din is, we learned that truma tmeya is burnt, and it could be used while it's being burnt. The kohen could be used while it's being burnt. Now a Yisrael is, there's 2 dinim over here. There's one din over here that a truma tmeya has to be given to a kohen. There's a chiyuv nesina. If a kohen has truma tmeya, he has a chiyuv nesina to the kohen. That's din number 1. And there's another din that a Yisrael is not allowed to have hanosh shel kilui from truma tmeya. So a Yisrael is not allowed to eat truma teira. That we learned. That's pashut. But here there's a din derabanan that a Yisrael is not allowed to have hanosh shel kilui from truma tmeya. So even if the kohen says, yeah, you could use it, but he's using it for himself, he's going to use it and burn it for himself, that is not allowed to. But while the kohen is having hanoh from it, he could also have hanoh from it. But to have hanoh from it directly for himself, that is not allowed to. So the Rambam says, halacha tezayin, male hakoyin ner shemen sreifa. You fill up with the oil. The ner means the keli which holds the oil. You fill up the oil with shemen sreifa, with shemen, which is of truma tmeya. That's what shemen sreifa means. And v'neisnei Yisrael lalis be'lalia. You give it to the yid, to the Yisrael, to go ahead, to go to the higher floor. Ulikanis leched lasis tzorchei hakeim. Avalei tzorchei Yisrael. You can't give it to him to use it for tzorchei Yisrael. In other words, even though it's the kohen's, this shemen sreifa is the kohen's, and the yid is really not eating it, but nevertheless, for the yid to go ahead and use shemen sreifa for his tzrochim, which is called, he's having a hanosh shel kilui from shemen sreifa, that's awesome. Avalei tzorchei Yisrael. However, v'imhoy yishutiv himei, if the Yisrael and the king were a shutiv, and lepel, the Yisrael is doing something which is l'tzorchei hashutfis, so it's mela, it's l'tzerich hakein as well, so that's mutter. Now Yisrael shohayirech etzel hakein, v'hiddu klei shemen sreifa, and the kohen was also being nana because he lit a candle over there of shemen sreifa, and then v'amid hakein v'holachlei, and now the kohen left, so only the yid is being nana from the shemen sreifa. Is ein chayv lechabesi achiyich b'me'elav. The yid is not mechuyev to extinguish this fire. And that's the number 1. And then he's saying another din, v'tevel ha'yisrael psila b'ner hakein umad dekleilach be'efak. A yid needs to light a candle, and he needs to dip the wick into oil in order to be able to light the candle. So the din is on a very little amount of oil. So he's dipping his psila into a ner of a kohen that has this shemen of truma. He's allowed to do that. That was a special din brought down in Yerushalmi. There was a zman sakona. There was a shiluach of zeivim. So mainly there was a special heter that they gave for this Indian to be able to, for people not to be able to have to go in the dark. So there was a heter that they could go ahead and dip their wick into a shemen of a kohen and light it. And even though later on this heter was, the reason for the heter no longer existed, but once they made the heter remained. Halacha Yudches. B'kori shel kain, you have a boker, a behem of a kohen, she'yomed etzel b'kori shel Yisrael, or the kelev shel kain, she'yonerag etzel kelye shel Yisrael. You have two people weaving clothes, and one was for Yidden, one was for Yisrael, one was for a kain. So the din is harezem madlik alei and shemen sreifa shalei b'rshus hakein. So over here, the Yisrael that has truma, he has truma tmeya, so he's allowed to go ahead and be madlik shemen sreifa. So first of all, there's two dinim over here. First, one chiddush is that it's not considered that it's hanoshel kili for the Yisrael because the kohen is also being nan. So because since there's a bikari shel kain there, and also the kelev shel kain is being narag, so that's not called a kilui l'tzerich Yisrael. And secondly, noch chiddush is that shalei b'rshus hakein. He doesn't have to ask the kain rishus. He could do it himself. And the pashtus advarim is that even though it's something which, the Rambam doesn't say. Some people want to say that this din would only be because l'chura there's a chiyuv nesina. The Yisrael has to give the truma to the kohen. So l'chura mitzad that din, how could he go and use this truma? L'chura has a chiyuv nesina. So some people say that takei nachinami, and Yerushalmi comes out that this din is only if we're dealing with a Yisrael that yarshim truma from his avi imei kohen. So memeli he doesn't have a chiyuv nesina, or in such a situation where there's no chiyuv nesina. Mashengen if there's a chiyuv nesina, he taka wouldn't be allowed to. But the pashtus lashon Rambam, the Rambam doesn't write that. The Rambam just says shalei b'rshus hakein. He's allowed to do it without the permission of the kain. Knows the fact that the kohen is going to be nana from it. That in itself is called a nesina. Knows he doesn't have to actually give it to the kohen. The fact that he's doing something without asking the kohen rishus, but lepel the kohen is being nana from it. That's also called a nesina for truma tmeya. V'chein madlikin shemen sreifa b'bati knesiyas or b'bati midrashas. You could go ahead and take shemen sreifa and light b'bati knesiyas b'bati midrashas mavois afelim again shlei b'rshus kain without asking the kain rishus, which pashtus means without giving it to the kain. The Yisrael has truma tmeya, and he goes ahead and he's madlik in these places. Mi she'ein lechulin lahadlik ner Chanukah is madlik shemen sreifa again shlei b'rshus kain. He's using shemen sreifa to be madlik for ner Chanukah because mitzvahs lavli on this nitnu. So memela, so that's not considered a hanoshel kilui because it's mitzvahs lavli on this nitnu. I lechura shalei b'rshus kain lechura is a chiyuv nesina. So it's a chiddush that since it's l'tzerich mitzvah, so we name on that the Yisrael is nicha to do a dvar mitzvah with his shemen sreifa because shemen sreifa is not really so valuable, and therefore he's allowed to be madlik shemen sreifa shalei b'rshus kain. Now madlik and shemen sreifa al gabi achelim, but that's only b'rshus kain. So notice this special din, this din that now that I have anoshel kilui, so for a chayla they were mevatra. The Chacham said for a chayla you're allowed to. However, there's another din, as we said, that you have to give it to the kohen. And memela, it has to be b'rshus kain. The kohen has to give permission to be madlik al gabi achayla, and then there's no problem of the fact that you're having anoshel kilui of shemen sreifa. Halacha yutes. Bas Yisrael shenisas l'kain. Vihi lemuda itzel aviyah, and she comes to her father. So she's a bas kain, so she's really entitled to use truma and also to use shemen sreifa. Is madlik b'rshusa. He's allowed to be madlik with her rishus. In other words, he's allowed to be madlik in his house shemen sreifa for her, and she's the one that's giving permission for it. And he's doing it, he's like preparing for her. Mutter l'kain lahadlik shemen sreifa afilo beis ha'ovel beis ha'mishta sheyesh shem irvuv. So the kain is allowed to be madlik shemen sreifa. What's the chidush? The problem over here is the kohen is allowed to, it's the kohen's, and the kohen is allowed to be matlikit. The question is only, since it's in the Beis HaMishna, there's a lot of people there, so maybe there's a concern that Yisraelim are going to use this shemen. So we say no. In the Beis HaMikdash, people dress nicely, and therefore they're not going to want to use shemen because they're afraid that their clothes will get dirty. In the Beis HaOvel, people aren't going to be taking shemen because of the tirda of the avelas. That's what we're saying. Shemi yisupkim imanu Beis HaMikdash. Why? Shemipnei nikin kleim ein negim. They wouldn't touch oil because they're concerned that the oil will get on their clothes. Beis HaOvel is that mipnei she'ein lem pnai mipnei evil. Since it's ein lem pnai mipnei evil, so therefore there's no chash. So the Nekudas HaKohen could be madlik sai Beis Evil, sai Beis HaMikdash, and there's no chash, because in Beis HaMikdash they won't use it because of the clothes, and Beis HaOvel they won't use it because they're through them in the avelos. Halacha Chof. Hazireya is a truma b'shegig yahapech b'mezid yikayim. Now giduli truma minateira giduli truma is chulin, is mamish chulin. However, midrabanan giduli truma is aser l'zorim. The Rambam is going to say in the next halacha the reason for it is because the Chacham were choishish that if you're going to have Terumah Tmeya, and Terumah Tmeya really the only thing you do is burn it. So rather than burning it, you're going to wait around with it, and then you're going to be zereya it, and then it'll grow. And Memela, so you'll utilize this Terumah Tmeya. And the chash is, first of all, Terumah Tmeya has to be burnt. It shouldn't be. You shouldn't be going or waiting until to plant it. And also, there's a chash until you actually plant it. It may come l'day takol. So Melech Chacham instituted that Geduli Terumah has a din of Terumah in the sense that it's Asura L'Zorim. That was a takona d'Rabban. Now here, Azireya Satruma b'shegig. The person was the Terumah b'shegig, so he did something wrong. He did it b'shegig, but he did something wrong. You shouldn't really be Zireya Terumah. So the din is because Terumah is not nitn l'Zireya. If it's Terumah Teira, it's supposed to be eaten, and even if it's Terumah Tmei, it should be burnt. It shouldn't be planted. Is Azireya is a Terumah b'shegig yahapich. You should be mahapich the karka and ruin. In other words, ruin the growth. B'mezid. If you did it b'mezid, so over here, since you did it b'mezid and lepel, there was already since you knows by shegi, it didn't really get a shem truma on the sada because you weren't aware that it's truma. Mashenkin over here, if you did it b'mezid, so you realize that it's truma. So mele there became already a shem truma on the sada. So now, if you're going to go and be mahapechit, so it comes out that you're ruining the truma. You're being mahabet truma b'yadayim that you're not allowed to do. So therefore, you kayim. Therefore, you should be mekayim it, and it'll have a din of geduli truma, which geduli truma has a din of truma legabi that it's asur l'zorm. So it comes out like a fakir tezach that if it's a shegig, you're being machmer on him and you hapech. Mashayinkin b'mezid is yikayim. Now hivia shlish. If it was already hivia shlish. So then, even ben b'mezid, ben b'shegig is yikayim, because once it was ivir shlish, so memela it already has a din of it's asura l'zarim, and has a certain din of truma, and it's already ivir shlish. So memela you don't want to be ma'abed b'yodayim something that grew again geduli truma that was ivir shlish. Now v'im hoya pishton, if it's pishton, which pishton is b'chlal, normally a person is interested in being zereyat. Whereas if he has geduli truma of pishton, he'd rather be zereyat because the pishton is not really lachila. Most of it he's going to use for the stalks. He's going to use them for clothes, for pishton. The zroim you could use for achila, but the rest of the pishton is used for other things. V'moya pishton is avila shlish, v'afila b'mezid is yahapach. Knas konsubei sheli yizra v'yizchavan lahonis beitzav. So over there's more of a chash, and therefore they constant even if it was a shlish is nochamo. If a person plants truma, he shouldn't be planting truma. If he plants truma, shebeshegig is yahafech, b'mezid yikayim. That's only if it was leivir. It wasn't ivir shlish. If it was ivir shlish, so even b'mezid is also. If it was ivir shlish, so even b'shegig also yikayim. Even b'shegig yikayim. B'medvar mamurm other things. Mashenkin when we're talking about pishton is even if it was b'mezid and it was ivir shlish, so from deswegen is yahafech. Halacha chafalv. Giduli truma, something that grows from truma, areihu kechulun chol dvarv. Be'atzim is chulun, even with Rabbanan is chulun. Ella, sha'asurim lizorim. The Rabbanan instituted, the Rabbanan didn't say that it's truma with Rabbanan. The Rabbanan said that Giduli truma is asurim lizorim. She'asurim lizorim ketruma, mishum truma tmei she'biyadakeim. The concern is that if you'll have truma tmei biyadakeim, sheli hashena etzlei, kedei she'yizra'enu v'teitzi l'chulun. In other words, it's a waste. He has truma tmeya, and all he's going to do is burn it. So he's going to wait around with it and plant it. So therefore, they said it's not going to be such a big benefit of planting it because it's going to be asura l'zar. And therefore they instituted that who adin truma teira. Al kol param the din is that geduli truma is asura lezorim. Shali Hashenu etzle k'dei she'izra'an v'teitzu l'chulin, and v'nimtza ba l'dei takol. It'll be l'dei takol that he has truma tmeya, and he's going to end up eating it. Lefichach, since we're saying be'amis it's not truma, it's only asura lezorim, is muter lechel ha'giduim b'yadayim tmeyas. There's no isser of eating b'yadayim tmeyas. And also a muter l'tful yem. A tful yem is allowed to eat it kechul. Now the Rambam doesn't say this clearly, but the din is that Eina Chinami, a Tful Yem is allowed to touch it. But if someone that's Tomei, a Tomei is not allowed to touch it. Someone that's a Rishon L'Tumah is not allowed to touch it. And Nachmer, if a Rishon L'Tumah touches it, so then it becomes puzzle, and then it's Asurim B'Achila. That's brought down in Rambam later on, in Sefer Tara. And Hakol Ponim, so the Rambam is just saying, the Rambam says really that Geduli Truma has a din of Chulin, is just that it's Asur L'Zar. And also that it's mutter, you don't have to have Netilas Yadayim, and the Tvul Yem was allowed to eat it. But the Rambam doesn't write that Tzad Isser, that the Tzad Isser is that if you're Mamash Tomei, even a Rishon L'Tumah, you're not allowed to eat Geduli Truma, and also if the Geduli Truma touched the Rishon L'Tumah, it became a Sheni L'Tumah, so then you have to burn it. Halacha Chav Beis. Now this is talking about Geduli Truma, is a din that it's Asur L'Zorim. However, Geduli Gedulim, if you planted the Gedulim, and now you have Geduli Gedulim, so that's Chulin L'chol Davar. So the Geduli Gedulim is Chulin L'chol Davar. It's Nachamal. Minat Teira, even Geduli Truma is Chulin. It's just Midrabanan, it's also Chulin, but it's Asur L'Zar, and it's Mutter for a Tvul Yem. And we said before that it's Asur for Tmeim. That's only talking about Geduli Truma, but Geduli Gedulim is Chulin L'chol Davar, even something that the thing that you plant doesn't disintegrate. From there it grows, like you'll have like an onion, so the onion doesn't fall apart, it doesn't disintegrate, it doesn't decompose. From the onion grows other leaves. Nevertheless, the Gedulin is Chulun L'chol Davar. In Rabu HaGedulin Al-Le'ikar, B'Geduli Gedulin, is a HaGedulin Hashnim Ma'il Nesa'ikar, Aval Pi Shein Zari Kola. And the Ya'akel Mutter L'Zar. Nachmer, not only is the Geduli Mutter, but even the fruit, knows you plant, you have Geduli Trum, which is Asura L'Zar. Then you take these Geduli Truma and you plant it, and then from those Gedulim something else grows. So even though there's something else that grows, the thing that it grew from didn't decompose, but nevertheless, since it was Rabu HaGedulim on what was planted, so Mela, that's matter also what was planted in the ground. So, for example, you'd have an onion, and that onion will be a Gedule Truma, and then from that onion came Gedulim, and the Gedulim that came out of the onion is more than the onion itself. So the onion itself also becomes mutter. That's the din over here. The Yio Hakel Mutter L'Zorim. V'chein Trumas Chutzlaretz, the Truma that comes from Chutzlaretz, or V'hamedumah. If you have Truma which is Medumah, which means really it was bottled b'shishim, bottled b'reiv. But midrabanan it has to be bottled b'meya. And the tasteless truma, there's a din tasteless truma means a person was mafresh truma, but it was mafresh echad mishish, less than echad mishishim. And now he's moisef to that truma. Midrabanan has to be moisef to that truma, because he should be mafresh echad mishishim. So that tasteless truma that he added, which be'emes l'chura, already the truma was already chal on the part that he was mafresh originally. So this is only like a drabanan dikadin of the tasteless truma. And also v'zereni gina she'ein necholim, nor garden seeds which she'ein necholim kigein zera lefes utznein, is afal pi she'isa lefes utznein truma, but the seeds of those lefes and tznein gidulei mutarim. So the gidul of all these things of trumas chutzlaretz, and truma which was meduma, and truma was tesus truma, and al derezeh the truma, if you have zereni gina of something which is taka truma, which is Ein Necholim, and those Zirei Gina were planted, so that is Gedelei Mutarim, Varein Chulin L'chol Davar. So they are Chulin L'chol Davar, is Nachamal. Geduli Truma Midrabanan is Asur. Geduli Gedulim is Mutter, and Nachmer, if the Geduli Gedulim, even if the Zari is not Kola, and the Geduli Gedulim was Moisef on the Iker, so the whole Iker also becomes Mutter. And then there are certain things with the Gedulim al Mechatchila Mutter. The Geduli Truma were never asert, and that is from a Meduma, and al derezeh from Tesus Truma, and al derezeh from Trumas Chutzlaretz, and also from a Geduli Truma of Zereni Gina which is Einan Nechol, even though it's, the Zirei Negina is coming from something which is Terumah, they're not Gedulei Terumah, they're Terumah itself, but these Zirei Negina, which is Einan Necholim, what grows from them has a din that it's not, that doesn't have a din of Gedulei Terumah, there's no Chumrah of Gedulei Terumah on what grows from them. And V'chein Azirei Pishtin Shel Terumah, if you take flax from Terumah and you plant it, so Hagidulim, what grows out of that flax is Mutar and Luzarim. So even though we learned before that Benegeh flax, there's a Chumrah, that even if it was B'shegig, and even if it was Igia Shlish, so nevertheless Yahapach, but nevertheless, even if it was B'mezid, and it was Igia Shlish is Yahapach, that's Taka Din, that you should be Yahapach. But Lopel, if it grew and you have Gedulim from Pishton, so Memela, then Mutar and Luzarim. Halacha Chav Gimel. Hazireya Truma Tmeya. Till now we were talking about you planted Truma. It didn't say Truma Tmeya. You planted Truma. And the Mela was Asur Lizarim. Over here, Hazireya Truma Tmeya. Is Aval Pisha Gedulim Tehirim. There's no Tuma that's transferred to the Gedulim. But nevertheless, Harei and Asur Bachila. They have that, since they're coming from something which is Asur Bachila because it's Truma Tmeya, so that then applies. Even a Kohen is not allowed to eat the Gedulei Truma Tmeya. Hail Vatruma Shenizra Asura Bachila Isa is Kvarnitchu, and therefore even a Kohen is not allowed to eat Gedulei Truma Tmeya. So you just they're pointing out that the reason why they made Bechlal the Isra on Gedulei Truma was because of the concern of having Truma Tmeya and then waiting with it and planting it. Now Lepel Truma Tmeya, if you planted it, is Taka Asr. It's not only Asr Lezarim, it's even Asr Lekein. Truma Tmeya that's Asr. But the Vaila, they also made a takana that all Geduli Truma should be Asr. They could have just made that Geduli Truma Tmeya is Asr, and Geduli Truma is Mutter, Kshahoisa. They didn't do that. They said that Geduli Truma Tmeya is Asr, even Lekoyim. And Geduli Truma of Tehera is Asur Lezarim, and its Mutar is Lekoyim. Halacha Chav Dalet. Chotach is Ha'olin Shetzamchu. We just learned that if you Zirei Truma Tmeya, so what grows from the Truma Tmeya is Asura Lezarim, is Asura even to a kain. It's Asur Bachila because it comes from something that was Asur. Now what happens if Chatech Hasa'olin Shetzamchu knows from this Truma Tmeya started growing the leaves and you cut those leaves? And then the Yatsu Olim Shneim V'chatchu, and then you cut again, and more leaves started coming out again a second time, and again you cut it. Is Hari Eichel She'etz Acharkach, the Eichel that you're going to come afterwards, there's the third set, so that's going to be in Mutter Bachil. Halacha Chavhei, Shsilei Zeisim Shenitnu. You have little, like saplings, but little plants that were detached from the ground, and that's why they became tummy. And as while they were attached to the ground, obviously they can't become tummy. They were detached from the ground, and they became tummy. And then Vizoran, and then you replanted it into the ground, and then V'asum Truma. Then when later on it was detached, and then it was Asum Truma. So now you have something that's Truma that was really once tummy. It was once tummy, and then it was attached to the ground, and now it was again detached, and now you're making it truma. Is that real mutar? Sharitaru b'zriya. Since it was planted into the ground, at that point in time, the fact that it was once tummy went away because it became part of the ground, so it lost its shem truma. And v'leinitmu kshein truma kadeshi asurim. They never were asur when they were truma. So in the case before, when we said something that was truma and it became asur, it became tummy, and then it was planted, so it remains with the Isser, because since it was Asr before it was planted, but over here it was different. Over here, before it was planted, it wasn't Truma, there was no Isser. And it was planted, Memela had lost its Shem Truma, and now it was Chal, the Shem Truma. So Truma that was Chal and something that was planted after it was originally Tummy, there's no problem. As opposed to if you have Truma Tmeya and then you plant it into the ground, and even something new grew out of it, so from deswegen, this Truma remains Asr. This Truma remains Asr. The Gedulim even remains Asr. Halacha Chavav. Shiboilas Shohesa B'teich HaKri Umirach HaKri Kuli. So a Kri means a pile, a heap of grain. And then when you straighten out that heap, when you make the Miruach, so that's called the Gemar Melacha. Now obviously we're talking about grain that was already after Disha and after being Zriya. There was the Gemar Melacha, you have kernels of wheat. Now over here you have a Shibelis, a stalk of wheat, which is very far from the Gemar Melacha, but this stalk of the wheat is in the Kri. So the din is Shibelis Shohesa B'teich HaKri Umirach HaKri Kula. So Ariesa Shibelis Tevel, the Shibelis is already considered Tevel. Hail v'nimracha b'teich HaKri. Since it was already nimracha b'teich HaKri, so it already had a Shem Tevel on it. Even though it was really on its own, it wasn't Nigmar Malachte. But Lepel, it had a din tevel because it was part of the Kri. Now Shasla, then you went ahead and stuck it into the ground. You put it into the ground, and it didn't take root yet. We're talking about it didn't really take root yet. Now V'asa Terumah. Now you went ahead and made a Terumah while it was Shasla. So the Harezu Safik Terumah. Over here there's a Safik whether the Shem Terumah is Chal. Why? Because Hail V'Zara, since you planted it into the ground, is Shema Parach HaTevel Mimenu. V'nase Kepedish Adayin L'Nigmru. Maybe it lost its Shem Tevel and it becomes like Pedish Adayin L'Nigmru, which means Pedish Adayin L'Nigmru, it's the Chaposh D'Zach. If the Pedish L'Moshel, in this case, doesn't mean Pedish Adayin L'Nigmru really, you could also be Chal, a Shem Meiser and Truma. But it means, this case over here, since it was once a Shem Tevel, and now it was Shasla, so there's a Svara, maybe you could be Keder on a Shem Truma on it. If it would have never been called Tevel, so there's nothing to talk about that once you were Shasla, you can't be Keder on a Shem Truma. So that's what he's saying. Hail V'Zara, Shem Parach HaTevel Mimenu, the fact that it has a history of once being Tevel, V'nas, so that was Parach, and now V'nase Kepedish Adayin L'Nigmru, as if these Pedish were never Nigmru, and it was Shasla, so Mele, it's not Shaykh to be Keder Shem Tvu on it. That's talking about in such a case. But if you were mechel in it, Hashem Terumah, before you planted it into the ground, so therefore, Harezu Terumah, it's definitely Terumah. In Tolish Mimanu V'achal. So notice again, we have the stalk that was in this Kri that had Miruach. So this stalk had a din of Tevel, and then you went ahead and you gave Hashem Terumah to the stalk, and then you went ahead and took this stalk and you inserted it into the ground, so it was Shasla, so it still remains Terumah. It didn't lose its Shem Terumah. Harezu Terumah Lefichach. Im Tolish Mimanu V'achal. If you went ahead and took this stalk out of the ground and ate it, so if you do it b'meizid, it's chayiv misa, and b'shegig is mishalom esachemish, like regular tvua, like regular truma. However, the mgochan v'ochal b'piv menoretz, if you didn't detach it, you have this stalk that was part of a kri, so it had a din tevel. Then you were kair under a shem truma, so it had a din truma. Now you were shasla, so you took something that was truma and shasla. And he was saying, if you detach it again from the ground, so it definitely retains its din truma, and everything is it's a din truma, regular din truma. Yechayev misa b'dei shemayim b'meizid, and b'shegi yechayev keren b'chemish. However, if you didn't detach it from the ground, you bent down, and ochel b'piv m'noretz is bottle daite etzel kolodim she'ein darab b'nei odem mekach. That's not considered a normal achila, and part of the din of eating truma has to be a normal achila. Sai legabi chiyav misa, and sai legabi chiyav keren b'chemish. So when he was gachan and ochal, so he doesn't have this din of echol truma b'shegig or echol truma b'mezid. But the ikavart is that since it was chal already a shem truma, sure the shosla doesn't take away the shem truma. Mashenkin, if it wasn't chal yet a shem truma, you didn't call it a din truma. So now the question is if it has a shem tevel. Now could be it has a din. If you call the question is if you called it Terumah after Shasla or before Shasla. The story is the same. The story was that it was a Shibelis and it was in a Kri and it was Shem Tevel and then it was Shasla. But then there was also a Kara Shem Tvua. So if you were Kara Shem Tvua before Shasla, so for sure it has a din of Terumah. The fact that Shasla doesn't take away the din Terumah, I mean, maybe you're chayiv for all the things that you be chayiv on Terumah on the condition that you didn't eat it while it's attached to the ground, because that's not the derech achila. If you first shasla and then you carry al Shem Terumah, so the question is if the shasla takes away this whole idea that it was a Shem Tevel, and then it's a suffix. That goes into a gather of a suffix. Halacha Chav Zayin. Soda shel giduli truma is chayaves beleket shikhu upeya ubetruma ubemaisres ubemaisirani. It's a soda shel giduli truma. Eno kanami it was giduli truma, and mele has dinim. The dinim that it's asura l'zorim, but everything else than that, it's a regular din of chulin. It's regular all the dinim of chulin. Vani Yisrael, vani Kenim, noitl mimenu matonis elu, but lepel it's also l'zorim. So ani Kenim eichlin shalahem. Vani Yisrael meichlin shalahem lekenim b'dmei truma. They sell it to the kenim b'dmei truma, and v'hadomim shalaniyim, and the domim belong to the aniyim, because since only a kohen is allowed to eat it. So Memela, so it's a lesser value. So Memela, the Kohen pays these people, the Aniyim that are taking Leket Shikhu and Peah from this field, which is Asura Lizarim, and they pay him for it to make truma. V'chein ben Levi, which knows you have to be mafresh trumas and meises from this field. So be'emes, the whole thing is asura l'zarim. So anyways, it's asura l'zarim. But you have to give meiser to the field. But lepel the Levi is not allowed to eat the meiser because it's asura l'zarim. So he's going to have to sell the meiser that he receives from this field to a kain. That's the word. V'chein ben Levi meicher ha-meiser shalei l'kain. Hachevet gedulim elu mishubach. The best thing is to not to use a behema to be dosh this field. Why? Because the field is the chasura l'zar. So if you have truma mamish, so there's no problem. If a behema is being dosh truma, so the ikr the dinam and atera, it's not. There's no isur of lisachsim sher b'disha. The isur of lisachsim sher b'disha doesn't apply if a behema is being dosh something which is not allowed to eat, which is truma. Mashenkin over here, be'emes min atera, the behema, a person has this behema. You have geduli truma. So min atera, the geduli truma is mutter l'yisro. So it's mutter to give to a behema. Elamai midrabanan, it's aser. So memela, so you can't really be choisim the share b'dishay, but on the other hand, you can't really let the truma, the behema eat from the disha because lepel it's asur l'zar. So this yisro that's taking this geduli truma has a shtickle problem. So hachevet geduli melu. If he takes and instead of using a behema to be dosh, he bangs it out. He bangs out the kernels from the stalks. That's meshubach. However, v'adosh bebehema, if he doesn't do that, he can't do it. He doesn't do it. His ketzed yasa is tele kfifes b'tzavri behema v'nesin l'techa meisi yamin. He puts a basket on the neck of the behema, and he puts from that min into the basket. So the behema is going to be eating. You don't have to be dosh. The behema is going to be eating. He's not going to be eating the produce that he's being dosh, and that's the chasura l'zarim. So the Yisrael is not allowed to be meichelet to his behema, but on the other hand, he didn't have to. On one hand, the behema is not eating it, and on the other hand, he wasn't choisim sher b'dishay. His nimtza le zeimus habehema, he wasn't zeimus habehema, and on the other hand, le meichelis hatruma. Over here, it's not really truma; it's geduli truma. It's geduli truma, which is asur l'zarim. So the mela is also asur to be meichel to his behema.